a photo opportunity you will not want to miss. The actual jungle location for the movie Muppet Treasure Island.
Released on February 16, 1996, Muppet Treasure Island was the second installment in the franchise to be released as part of the Jim Henson Company's distribution deal with Disney, following the universally beloved Christmas Carol in '92. It was also the last film they distributed. Like its predecessor, it too was a Muppetational take on a classic work, this time adapting the iconic Robert Louis Stevenson adventure novel, only with some added musical numbers, and the band of bloodthirsty pirates being swapped out for lobsters, goats, and whatever the hell this thing is supposed to be. Though despite sharing much of the same DNA as Christmas Carol, having a near-identical creative team with Jerry Jewell working on the screenplay, cinematography by John Fenner, production designer Val Strozovec, and of course both films being directed by Jim's son Brian Henson, this film has not yet received the cultural reframing that its more festive counterpart did. You might find it hard to believe given how we look at the movie today, but The Muppet Christmas Carol was not a big hit initially. On a budget of $12 million, it was able to gross $27 million. Not a failure by any means, but not exactly the success the company was hoping for and needed at that time, with the movie likely only barely managing to turn a profit. But thanks to home media sales and TV airings every December, it was culturally re-evaluated and has since become a Yuletide staple for millions across the globe, including my family, where we have a strict tradition of only watching the film once per year on Christmas Eve. Still didn't stop me from having the entire script memorized by age 10. Today, Christmas Carol is universally lauded for its production value, wonderful soundtrack, and taking itself seriously as an adaptation. It is one of the top contenders for films based on this novel that include the most book-accurate dialogue. So how come the follow-up has not received anywhere near the same amount of acclaim or popularity, despite generating far bigger numbers during its box office run? Why is it always no cheeses for us Mises, and never I could have been a lawyer but I just had too much heart? What about light the lamp, not the rat makes people constantly quote it like it's the funniest line in cinematic history, yet when I pull up to the function referencing Dead Tom or Mr. Bimbo, suddenly I'm the weird one? Greetings and salutations everyone, my name's Jake and welcome to My Mind Palace, where I dust off various shows and movies from my past, talk about my connection to them, and determine how well they hold up all these years later. This time, in commemoration of the film's 30th anniversary, we're setting sail across the big blue wet thing to re-examine Muppet Treasure Island. And this is a discussion that I have a lot of personal stake in, because Muppet Treasure Island is a very important piece of cinema to me. After all, it was my introduction to these characters. If I had to give a rough estimate of which DVD I played the most while growing up, it would likely be one of my SpongeBob ones, though this isn't that far behind. I was of course aware of the other movies and the TV shows. After all, the very first thing on this disc is a promo for the Muppet Show season box sets, and I did watch bits and pieces of Muppets from Space, which used to air on TV all the time, but I didn't become invested in the franchise as a whole until the 2011 movie came out. Which is wild to think about today, where my intense love for these characters is such an integral part of my personality, but for the first decade of my existence, this movie, Christmas Carol, and Muppet Vision 3D were my only real attachment to them. Yet, as the years have gone by and I've become fully versed in every Muppet production, I rarely ever see this one enter the discussion. It's not universally hated like Muppet Wizard of Oz or Kermit Swamp Years, it's not held in the same regard as the first movie or The Great Muppet Caper, nor has it had a substantial cultural impact like Take Manhattan or the 2011 movie. And through this video, hopefully we'll gain a better idea of why exactly that is. Before that though, we need to understand how we got here, because a lot of this film's problems can be traced back to early in the production. The studio began planning for the next Muppet movie pretty much on the heels of Christmas Carol, wanting to do yet another retelling of a classic story that would allow the characters to take on new roles, while also pushing the crew as filmmakers. Though a lot of the initial discussions are credited to writer Kirk Thatcher, who was a major driving force behind the project early on. Thatcher had joined the company in '89 as a designer and producer on the Jim Henson Hour, specifically for the Muppet television segments, before moving on to become a writer on the series Dinosaur. Despite not being with the company for very long, he quickly grew disillusioned and frustrated with the direction the Muppets seemed to be heading in following Jim Henson's passing, with Christmas Carol doing little to assuage these concerns. He believed the film would cause significant harm to how audiences saw the characters, making them too cute and wholesome, a sentiment I can understand. While I will never argue against Christmas Carol being a masterpiece, it had significantly pedaled back the typical Muppet antics in favour of a more serious tone that served the original story, only sprinkling in hints of that trademark mayhem. It is an adaptation of the Charles Dickens novel first and a Muppet movie second, so Thatcher wanted their next motion picture to be the inverse of that. However, deciding what movie they wanted to make was the easy part. Figuring out how they'd do it was a rather arduous endeavour. Brian Henson formally announced the project in May of 1993, stating they expected filming to begin in London during the fall with a projected release of the following year. This would not come to pass, as the cameras did not start rolling until the spring of '95. The reason for the delay is that they simply could not finish a version of the screenplay that they were all happy enough with to move forward. Thatcher collaborated with Jerry Jewell, head writer of The Muppet Show, who is often credited as being the man who gave the characters soul and humanity. But the pair were habitual procrastinators who struggled to figure out what shape the movie should take, spending close to a year just working on various story outlines. This eventually got to a point where Brian Henson told them that he would refuse to have his hair cut until the screenplay was finished. One of the major issues they were having was the casting of Jim Hawkins, and whether or not they'd put an established Muppet in the role or have it be played by a human actor. Early on, there were some talks about potentially having Robin play young Hawkins, though this was quickly shot down as Robin was simply too young for the part. For a long time it was decided that they'd simply split the character in two, much like they did with the Marley Brothers, with Gonzo playing Jim and Rizzo playing Hawkins, until executives expressed concerns that the pair would not be able to carry the emotional weight of the film, something the team agreed with. Treasure Island is a coming-of-age story, so casting a child actor for the protagonist really was the only way forward. Finally, progress was starting to be made, especially when they brought in James V. Hart to help iron out the finer details of the script so full production could at last begin. This was poised to be the biggest Muppet production yet, with the film requiring 7 sound stages to house the over 13 elaborate sets the team had built following the leadership of designer Val Strazovic, the most impressive of which being the Hispaniola itself. Every shot in a Muppet movie is a challenge, but this took it to a whole other level, bringing a whole slew of new challenges the team met head-on to make the final result feel larger than life.
The ship was quite a challenge to do, because I was trying to create a ship which will be more kind of friendly to Muppets and also accept human.
Though the greatest technological advancement was in the movement of the majestic vessel. The entire set was placed on top of a computer-controlled gimbal, with these massive hydraulic cylinders that were capable of pushing 50 tons on either side, creating this realistic rocking motion that the team could increase or decrease to perfectly mimic how it would move in the water.
We are using basically the same valve equipment and everything else that a flight simulator uses.
However, this effect worked so well that Brian Henson became worried that it was going to cause people to experience seasickness. So, on the first day of shooting, he was sure to give everyone some Dramamine in the hopes it would prevent anyone from falling, both ill and off the set.
So it was actually, the other problem was Tim Curry was going to kill me, because it was like the first scene that he's in the movie, and there he is, he can hardly stay awake.
The many period costumes for the Muppets were the work of Polly Smith, a position she had held ever since The Muppet Show, and she always brings her A-game, creating these gorgeously detailed and heavily researched pieces that only elevate the works that feature them. When talking about her process while working on the designs for Treasure Island, Smith said, "I knew from the script what each character was playing, and from the research I picked out little elements. I have to think about their body types, what they can handle, and also what I need to hide. Usually it is a lot because they have very peculiar shaped bodies. In a revelation that will surprise utterly no one, the biggest undertaking in terms of costumes for the movie was Miss Piggy, with her Barbra Streisand-esque island princess ensemble. Every single one of those feathers had to be two-tone dip-dyed individually, her leopard skin sarong fabric was also painted, and her shoes were handmade. You can admire the meticulous craftsmanship on screen, but there are so many tiny details we barely catch a glimpse of in the final movie. Minute things you'd only notice if you were able to see it all in person, and fortunately enough, I have. One of the things people praise the most about Muppet Christmas Carol is its faithfulness to the source material, lifting a lot of its dialogue directly from the original text. Thus, I've always been curious as to how this movie stacks up in that department. So for the first time ever, I picked up a copy of the original Stevenson novel and read the whole thing cover to cover to see how much of it was used in the film. What I learned is that not only is very little from this book used in the Muppet version, but that nearly everything I enjoy about this story are things that were only added after it was first published. I found it vastly interesting going back to the original book, which is so far removed from what modern audiences associate with this story, and look at it almost as a case study for how constant adaptations of certain pieces of text can completely transform how we perceive the original in the modern zeitgeist. So as I'm giving my thoughts on the movie and its own take on the material, we're also going to be talking about how the story itself has been altered over time, and whether or not those changes were positive or negative. Muppet Treasure Island retells the story of Jim Hawkins, a lowly orphan working at the Admiral Benbow Inn with his best friends Gonzo and Rizzo, who dreams of a better life filled with adventure. When one of the patrons, a grizzled old pirate named Billy Bones, bequeaths a treasure map to the trio while on his deathbed, they join forces with a half-wit squire, a doctor, and his assistant to set sail on the Hispaniola, manned by Captain Smollett and his first mate Mr. Arrow, in the hopes of finding riches beyond their imaginations. But they soon find that treachery lurks on board, as they discover pirates have infiltrated the crew and are planning a violent mutiny once they reach the fabled island, all headed by the ship's cook and master manipulator, Long John Silver. With their destination now in sight, it all falls on Jim, who must find a way to foil the dastardly scoundrels and rescue his friends before they all end up adding to the tally of souls that were lost in pursuit of Flint's treasure. While I do deeply love this film, I can't help but find it indicative of a major problem the Muppets were having around this time. I touched on this way back during my Muppets from Space video, how during the 90s the franchise kept going for spectacle, leaving behind the smaller, more intimate scope of the previous films. We went from a lot of shooting on location, which firmly placed the characters in our world and made the stories feel grounded, to these massive, elaborately designed sets on a soundstage, which, while stunning and expertly crafted, gives the movies a dreamlike quality that makes it come across as more artificial. Granted, that is the only way they were ever going to portray 18th century London on the budget they had, but it was a rather strong departure from the settings audiences previously saw these characters in, and Treasure Island, for better or worse, is the apex of that shift. The sheer size and scale of these sets, all built by top-of-the-line craftspeople, are magnificent. In particular, I've always been drawn to the design of the Benbow Inn, with its slanted doorways and crooked banisters conveying how the place has fallen into disrepair, while elements like the ever-present clutter or the low-hanging chandelier help us understand why Jim finds this place suffocating. A brilliant example of visual storytelling. Of course, dealing with the Muppets, there are going to be a bunch of practical effects. I mean, every shot featuring a Muppet is technically a practical effect. But upon rewatch and doing research, I was stunned by how well the digital effects hold up, at least in comparison to stuff like the flying scenes from Christmas Carol. Okay, some stuff does stick out, and the green screen is blatantly obvious at points, but I'm impressed at just how good and convincing many of the shots of the ship on the water still look. In all, the film features over 400 Muppets and a greater number of human actors than ever before. It is truly a technical marvel. Especially the musical numbers that take place on the Hispaniola, which were choreographed beautifully by Pat Garrett. with all the crewmates carrying out individual tasks in the background and having the camera constantly moving to give these sequences such intoxicating energy. This was the final Muppet movie to have John Fenner as the cinematographer, who started with the company in the 80s when he was hired for the storyteller, and his work truly shines here. One part that has always stuck out to me is the shot composition in the scene where Jim first meets Long John Silver, with the sun peeking through the window keeping Jim, Gonzo and Rizzo in the light while Silver lurks in the shadows. Even with that though, there remains a few rays behind him, hinting that while he is the villain, there is still more to him. But while I can praise the production value, which I consider the highest of any Muppet movie, at some point this desire to keep biggering comes at the expense of having enough emotional substance, and this film ends up crossing that line. The very core of the Muppets is found family because that's what the original group of performers were, and that is reflected in every single movie in some form or other. The emotional climax is always the characters reaffirming their strong love for each other. And Treasure Island is a fairly decent vessel to push that message. It's a story about a bunch of strangers who are deeply bonded by this adventure they embark on. Towards the end of the book, Silver does say, "Why, there you all are together like a happy family," in a manner of speaking. And the film wants that to be its underlying theme, evidenced by the ending where they are all standing triumphantly together against Silver.
Kill Captain Smollett and you'll have to kill me.
Kill Jim and you'll have to kill me.
Kill Gonzo and you'll have to kill me.
Kill Squatch, Trelawney, and Mr. Bimbo, and you'll have to negotiate strenuously.
Going somewhere, John John?
But because we are dealing with such a high volume of characters and are spending a lot of our time gawking at these huge set pieces, the movie forgets to actually develop these ideas in any meaningful way. Instead, what we get is a lot of the film telling, but not showing.
I'm an orphan, I've got no family.
Hey, you got us.
Yeah, we're family.
And our mates will always be just like a family.
Thanks for coming along, men.
Are you kidding? Jim's family.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Hawkins, it seems your little family has come together against me.
I think this is most egregious with Jim and Captain Smollett. In the book, they really have no connection whatsoever. The chapter in which Smollett is introduced concludes with Jim proclaiming that he hates him, and the very last thing Smollett says to Jim in the closing pages is, "You're a good boy in your line, Jim, but I don't think you and me'll go to sea again." So the film wants to give them a deeper relationship, but again, it doesn't have the time it needs to do that properly. So instead it tries to shortcut that by mentioning that Smollett had previously met Jim's father.
Which one of you is Hawkins?
I am, sir.
I knew your father, Jim. He was a good man.
Thank you, sir.
This is the most meaningful interaction the pair have prior to the big "we're a family" moment. Everything else is them arguing over who gets to look after the map or Jim telling him about the mutiny. They do not earn the sweet moment of Smollett comforting Jim after he says goodbye to Silver.
Well done, Jim. Your father would be proud.
Sir, why are you congratulating him? He just let one of your prisoners go with all of the treasure you have spent months out here searching for. And that brings us to the characters themselves. As previously stated, perhaps the biggest hurdle the team faced during development was the casting of Jim Hawkins, who in the novel is in his mid to late teens. Once it was decided to place a human in the role, casting saw about 100 young performers before it ultimately went to a 15-year-old actor named Kevin Bishop, who was actually the first one to audition. And he mostly does a fine job. A perfectly solid performance.
I will personally finance the voyage for the treasure myself.
You'll do that? Really?
Though to be entirely fair, it's not like he had a lot to work with. Treasure Island is supposed to be a story about the loss of innocence, about a wide-eyed boy who is suddenly thrust into a world of bloodthirsty pirates where he is constantly surrounded by death to a point where it entirely desensitizes him. But book Jim Hawkins is such a boring character. Despite the novel being his first-hand account of the events, there is very little insight into how he feels about what's happening or the effect it's having on him. The writing is emotionally detached and matter-of-fact. So when we get to the big oh my gosh moment when he has to throw a dead body overboard and says, "The habit of tragical adventures has worn off almost all my terror for the dead," it doesn't leave much of an impact because we had never seen his supposed previous terror for the dead. I mean, multiple people have died, some directly in front of him, and he has never had any reaction. He doesn't even really decide to go on the adventure, but rather he's simply told that he's going to be tagging along by the Doctor. To that point, this version of the character is a marked improvement. Giving him a Disney princess complex where he yearns for something better and showing him making a conscious choice to seek out the adventure instantly makes him more identifiable. So what exactly is my issue with Bishop's performance? I don't think he is truly comfortable while working with the Muppets. Like, he's trying his best, but he can't quite give himself to the illusion. It reminds me of the kid who played young Scrooge, where he just looks lost and confused the entire time, but to a far less severe degree. The other thing I'm not the biggest fan of is his singing. Not to say that it's bad by any means. It's very pleasant and has this light, innocent quality to it that works for the character. However, he sings everything in head voice, which causes the performance to suffer because it lacks conviction. That could have worked had there been some kind of progression. It's always felt strange that Jim does not sing again after sailing for adventure, and I feel his story would have been greatly improved had he been given one more song during the third act. I know Muppet movies don't follow traditional musical structure, but imagine if after Jim escapes the pirates, he's at his lowest and maybe even regretting leaving home to begin with, and he sings a song reflecting on his journey until he finally starts singing out in full chest voice, symbolizing how much more confident and sure of himself he has become. There is a reason I suspect this didn't happen, and it's the fact that the movie was essentially being made on a ticking clock, with Bishop starting to go through puberty, so all his singing was recorded very early in the pipeline before his voice changed, meaning they were pretty much locked in and couldn't change or add any songs featuring him after that point. Though personally I would have just embraced it, as having his voice get slightly deeper throughout the movie would have really helped the whole coming of age thing. I don't want to be too harsh because this role was always going to be exceptionally challenging. I mean, he not only had to hold his own while acting with the Muppets, but also Tim Curry in one of his most career-defining roles.
And believe me, lad, a friend you can trust is worth his weight in gold.
There are two paths a performer can take when working with the Muppets. They can either serve as a comedic foil to the chaos unfolding around them, or become an active participant in the madness. And these two camps have created a wealth of unforgettable guest stars and celebrity cameos over the decades. But within that group is a special few who not only kept up with the Muppets, but completely upstaged them, and Tim Curry's performance as Long John Silver is at the very top of that list. So it was shocking to learn that he was one of the very last pieces of the movie to fall into place. For most of pre-production, the crew had no idea who they'd be getting to take on one of literature's most iconic villains, as elements like the music were finalised before any casting decisions were made, with the songwriters simply having to pray they would get someone who could handle these very demanding numbers. It helped that Tim Curry understood the assignment better than anyone else ever has. Yes, even you, Michael.
Humbug.
Like the rest of the world, he was already a huge fan of the Muppets, and that excitement bleeds through into his performance, that was heavily inspired by his grandfather, as he attacks each line with such vibrato and vigour, but he also held such an intense admiration for the Muppet performers. This was around the time he was looking into getting more involved with the world of voice acting, something this production taught him a lot about, so he respected the craft of puppeteering and fully grasped what was required of him. By this point, Curry had such an accomplished resume of stage and screen credits, in which he demonstrated near endless versatility in the characters he could play, but this movie challenged him in ways he could have never anticipated. For instance, he had never been truly comfortable with the idea of improvising in his work, but the Muppets are a vehicle that runs on spontaneity, and being in that atmosphere helped bring him out of this mindset and not be afraid to experiment. The emotional scene that features Silver and Jim opening up about the loss of their fathers was, according to Curry, entirely improvised, where he used his own real-life experiences to connect with Jim's character. In his memoir titled Vagabond, when talking about this experience, he writes, "I drew from the heart and they let me roll with it." And that is exactly what makes this performance so iconic. While Tim Curry is a fantastic comedian, he is also a genuinely phenomenal actor, and he brings such profound humanity to Silver and makes you believe in his bond with Jim. That final scene gives me chills every time.
We're shipmates, aren't we, Jim? Gentlemen of fortune together. Give us one more chance.
And none of it is from the book. The connection between Jim and Silver, which is seen as the backbone of the story that every adaptation focuses on, is nowhere to be found in the novel. They hardly interact while on the ship, and when Jim gets taken hostage by the pirates, the only reason Silver spares him is because he already sees this plan heading south and needs a witness who could potentially save him from the gallows. There's none of this run lad save yourself when the pirates turn on them, and when he does escape on the return voyage, there isn't one final confrontation between them. He simply disappears in the dead of night with a small portion of the gold as Jim says, "I think we were all glad to be so cheaply quit of him." Admittedly, having him personally kill multiple people does harm his likability, which is why most adaptations have his underlings do all the dirty work. But Curry takes that character and purely through his facial expressions transforms him into the very heart and soul of the movie, all while still being the villain. I mean, this is a Muppet movie where the best scenes barely feature any Muppets. That is an accomplishment, and it speaks to Tim Curry's insurmountable talent. No wonder he still heralds this as one of the best motion pictures he ever made, and to this day continues hinting at the on-set romance that he may or may not have had with Miss Piggy. The only other two human actors worth mentioning are Billy Connolly as Captain Billy Bones and Jennifer Saunders as the owner of the Admiral Benbow Inn, Mrs. Blooveridge, with both of them giving utterly brilliant performances despite their low amount of screen time. Of course, Billy Connolly is a comedic legend, and his casting is a nice nod towards the story's Scottish roots. He also has the honour of getting to say the only line in the script that was taken verbatim from the book.
But I'll trick them. I'll shake out another reef and daddle them again.
Out of everyone, his portrayal most closely resembles his written counterpart, with him being this constantly on edge yet still competent pirate with a fondness for Jim and a severe alcohol dependency that ends up causing a stroke which kills him, all of which is present in the film.
Show the clip.
Captain Bones!
Mrs. Blooveridge, the demanding yet secretly kind innkeeper, is a completely different story, because she's not actually in the story. In the book, the Benbow Inn is Jim's family home, which is owned by his parents, who are both alive at the start of the book until his father dies from illness a few pages in. And while I think changing it to merely be Jim's place of employment lessens the emotional impact of seeing it get destroyed and takes the weight out of his choice to leave, all of that is worth it for Jennifer Saunders' scene-stealing performance.
Don't forget to come back tomorrow for our lunchtime special, roast suckling potatoes.
All right.
Potato. No offense, madam. No offense.
With all the notable human characters addressed, we can now move on to our usual rundown of all the significant Muppet players, using their presentation in the movie to explore where the characters were at this point in their history. This film is the middle installment in the 90s Gonzo and Rizzo trilogy, as they take on the role of Jim's best friends and found family who join him on the adventure.
I hate my life.
I hate your life too.
If I had a life, I'd hate it.
Christmas Carol had placed these two in the spotlight as the franchise's new comedic duo, something that this film fully crystallizes by further showing how their personalities contrast. Rizzo is a gluttonous coward, while Gonzo is an adrenaline junkie who gleefully leaps into danger's arms. A dynamic we'd glimpsed in the previous film, but has now been brought front and center.
We're gonna be rich.
We're gonna be dead.
It also helps that this time, rather than merely commentating on the story, they are now active participants able to interact with the other characters. And because he no longer carries the responsibility of being the narrator, we get a strong return to a more classic form of Daredevil Gonzo, getting excited over the fact the pirates want to kill them and joyously celebrating while he's being tortured.
Look at this! I'm talking baller! This is so cool! I may even have a future with the NBA!
What I will say is that because Gonzo and Rizzo are characters added after it was decided that a human would play Jim, their presence often feels inconsequential, as once the Hispaniola sets sail, they very much become an afterthought, and have little bearing on the overall narrative outside of providing emotional support for Jim, even after he ditches them to spend time with Silver, something the film kind of glosses over.
Rizzo?
Jim, we've missed you! Climb in!
If I had been given command over the script, what I would have done is have only Gonzo and Rizzo overhear the mutiny and immediately try to inform Jim, who dismisses their claims by insisting they're jealous, causing the trio to have a little tiff right before Jim gets taken. Then, when he shows up later to save the pair, they could have a heartwarming reunion where they apologise and Jim refers to them as family while an instrumental reprise of Something Better plays in the background. Suddenly, you've given Gonzo and Rizzo more relevance to the plot, and by calling back to the lantern scene, that underlying theme of family feels more complete, by having Jim fully acknowledge it instead of it being Silver who says it out loud. Moving right along, we have Kermit the Frog assuming the role of Captain Abraham Smollett, though in the book his name is Alexander.
I do believe that Robert Louis Stevenson actually wrote the captain of the ship as a frog. That's a little known fact.
In the novel, the captain is a stern but wickedly intelligent leader who lives his life by a strict code. He will fulfill his duties to the squire by leading the voyage, but wants nothing to do with the island or the treasure, insisting the map be kept secret from him or else he will choose to resign. He's a rather unsavoury character whom none of the crew likes until his sharp wit is the only thing keeping them alive while they are facing off against the pirates, who significantly outnumber them. The best chapter in the book, which I dearly wish had been incorporated into the film, is the attempted negotiations between Silver and Smollett. It's such a tense and well-written moment of these two egos clashing. However, including that sequence would require the movie's Captain Smollett to be strong-willed and confident, something that shouldn't really be a problem for Kermit the Frog. Unfortunately, this is Steve Whitmire's Kermit the Frog.
Hello, everyone.
I've hinted in the past of how I am not the biggest fan of the ways Steve Whitmire changed Kermit during his tenure as the character. The script for my Muppets from Space video originally featured a full breakdown of what I don't like about his portrayal, but I ended up cutting it during the editing and quickly replacing it with me saying the different characterization somewhat worked for that film. The reason I did that is that I still admired him as an artist. I mean, I grew up with this performance. I didn't want to discredit the passionate work he did for all these years. But when you release an incredibly bitter blog post claiming ownership of a character you didn't create and saying you're the only person capable of playing them, while badmouthing your fellow performers, some of whom you worked with for nearly 20 years, then the gloves come off, and Captain Smollett in this movie perfectly illustrates the problems with Whitmire's take on the character. Christmas Carol was his first major project as Kermit, though he was playing Kermit acting as Bob Cratchit, a very fixed character who needs to be portrayed a certain way. Bob Cratchit is unendingly kind and sincere to contrast against his employer, but that relationship also means he has to be incredibly passive because he isn't allowed to stand up to Scrooge. And it is a fantastic performance of that character. Like, no notes, this is a perfect Bob Cratchit. Then the movie finished, and Whitmire kept playing Kermit exactly like that for the following 20 years. Jim Henson's Kermit was very anxious, and he did have these soft, caring moments, but he was not lacking a backbone, and was fully capable of standing up for himself.
Piggy, you are fired! You are fired! Piggy, you are fired! Fired!
He was a very rough character, often shown to be snarky or even rude. Could you honestly imagine Whitmire's Kermit ever saying something like this?
I don't know how to thank you guys. I don't know why to thank you guys.
These are all qualities that would perfectly suit Captain Smollett from the book. And as I was reading it, I constantly found myself thinking how perfect this role would have been for Jim Henson's Kermit. And credit where it's due, there are still some echoes of that in Whitmire's performance.
Who hired this crew? This is undoubtedly the seediest bunch of cutthroats, villains, and scoundrels I have ever seen, so who hired them?
But then that quickly fades and we're once again left with either the generic nice guy or the complete pushover that would define Kermit in the decades that followed. And of course, characters change over time as roles are passed down and new creative voices take over. That is the simple reality with franchises that last this long, which is why I've scarcely said anything about this. And even if it was a vastly different take on the character, I still greatly enjoyed Whitmire's performance on its own merits. But that blog really ticked me off. Trying to discredit the other Muppet performers by claiming you didn't have your own interpretation of the character and that you are the only person capable of preserving the soul of Jim Henson, when that is blatantly not true, because this movie was only the beginning of you smoothing down all of Kermit's rough edges and sanitizing him. Whew, that was a tad more heated than I typically like to be around here. Suppose that's what happens when you've waited to get something off your chest for a few years. Thankfully, the next character we have to talk about is one of my favourite things about the movie, Sam the Eagle as Mr. Arrow. The thing I enjoy most about this era of the Muppets is how, with Jim Henson and Richard Hunt's characters either being recast or temporarily retired, it gave previously less important characters a chance in the spotlight, which is how Rizzo got his big break. Sam the Eagle had been present since the very first pilot for The Muppet Show, a pompous busybody who was meant to parody overzealous conservatives and purity culture, always complaining about the state of the country and battling Kermit on the content of the shows which he finds morally reprehensible, only for his hypocrisy to quickly be unmasked.
I would just like to say a few words about nudity in the world today.
Despite his presence as a great comedic foil, he was only ever a bit player on The Muppet Show and was relegated to quick cameo appearances in the original trilogy of movies. Christmas Carol demonstrated that Sam had potential to be far more than the guy who occasionally pokes his head around the doorway to call everyone weirdos.
You will love business. It is the American way.
Sam. It's just...
Oh, it is the British way.
Good.
And until Muppets Most Wanted finally made him a principal cast member again, his stint as Mr. Arrow was his biggest claim to fame, and gave young me a false impression that this guy was far more important to the franchise overall because he is an absolute delight and gets the best lines in the movie.
Any man caught dawdling will be shot on sight.
I didn't say that.
I was just paraphrasing.
Mr. Arrow is the character who received the biggest glow up after the novel was published because Arrow in the book is hardly even a character at all. He's introduced at the start of the voyage as an incredibly lenient authority who has no command over the crew and a drinking problem, before dying a few pages later by falling overboard in the middle of the night. This was the most shocking revelation to me because I've only ever known Mr. Arrow as this commanding and dedicated officer whose death or disappearance is a key moment where the tone of the story shifts. It marks the end of the childish fantasy and the whimsical adventure as we realise the true dangers. Then you go back to the novel and his exit from this mortal coil is barely even a footnote, with the captain responding with, "Well, gentlemen, that saves the trouble of putting him in irons," a far cry from the emotional send-offs we expect him to receive. If I were going to cast a Muppet to play an Arrow that was more accurate to the book, and was in a perfect world where we still had all the original Muppet performers, I would honestly pick Scooter. I could see him trying to be in charge but having no sway with the crew because he is very suggestible. But things had to change because, well, they're not going to kill off any of the Muppets, so we get Mr. Deus Ex Arrow's triumphant return to help everyone in the final battle.
Good to see you alive, Mr. Arrow.
Thank you, Captain.
Following a very reduced role in the previous film, Fozzie makes his return to the main Muppet cast, playing the part of Squire Trelawney. Yet another character who is nothing like the book, though this one they fully acknowledge by having it be directly stated that this is his half-wit son. And yes, I was utterly devastated when I learned that the Squire from the book does not in fact believe a man is living in his finger, meaning I am left to wonder what on earth possessed them to come up with that.
He's been to the moon. Thank you. Twice.
It's such a random idea that in any other performer's hands would have gotten old incredibly fast, but Frank Oz absolutely sells it with his, as usual, great delivery and comedic timing.
Your finger hired the crew?
No, that's silly. The man who lives in my finger hired the crew. Mr. Bimbo. What?
Also, it is perhaps a tad more realistic that this is the type of man who would fund an entire treasure hunting expedition on the whims of a child and would entrust the ship's cook with hiring the crew.
Do something!
Oh, Master Hawkins, you've come to rescue us.
I should have let him live in my finger.
If there is one Muppet I believe most closely matches their book counterpart, it would have to be Dr. Bunsen Honeydew as Dr. Livesley. In the novel, the Doctor is very much a man about business, quite a jovial fellow, though he doesn't take grief from anyone. He was actually my favourite character from the book, as I found him to be the most fleshed out and nuanced. Unfortunately, his role in the film has been significantly diminished, going from a close family friend of Jim's to the Squire's employee. But I guess they wanted the character to more closely resemble how we're used to seeing him, which is why he has become a research and development scientist instead of a medical professional. With that said, this is still a pretty decent role for him and Beaker, acting as another example of experimenting with giving Muppets not a part of the core group a more substantial presence.
We call this the window shade cure. All right, snip, snip, snip.
The final Muppet worth addressing is Miss Piggy as Benjamina Gunn, who I'm surprised even agreed to be in this picture when she doesn't actually show up until over an hour into the runtime.
It didn't matter how small or how large the part was. I wanted to do it.
In the book, while running from the pirates, Jim meets a marooned sailor by the name of Ben Gunn, who has a history with Captain Flint and his crew, including Silver. Though I highly doubt Robert Louis Stevenson ever imagined they would have that kind of relationship. But then again, they are pirates.
Oh, well, hello, Long John.
Oh no, him too?
In this take on the story, Benjamina was one Smollett's fiancé who was left at the altar.
I got cold feet.
You're a frog. You're supposed to have cold feet.
And on the rebound, she had a fling with Captain Flint, who ended up marooning her on the island. I really like the idea of giving Gunn a prior connection with one of the main cast besides Silver, as her and Smollett reunite on the island, which is where that classic sweet and sour Piggy and Kermit relationship is allowed to shine in the film's final act, as the two are able to reconcile.
So where did you get that gold necklace you're wearing? The one made of Spanish doubloons.
Aye.
Shopping channel?
One peculiar thing that stuck out to me on this rewatch is how none of the established Muppet characters are allowed to be presented as the bad guys, with one or two exceptions. The Mutineers are all made up of original characters, or characters whose previous appearances were so minor they might as well be original characters. Except New Zealand for some reason, who is clearly shown to be one of the pirates. They even have to make a point that while they are technically playing for the pirates, the Electric Mayhem are a neutral third party in all this.
Hey man, I can't figure out what side we're on. Are we with the pirates or the frog captain?
Oh, hey man, just play the gig. Never get involved in politics.
Politics! Politics!
And Sweetums gets an 11th hour redemption during the final battle.
Well, thank you. But aren't you supposed to be fighting against us?
Are you kidding? I love you guys.
My headcanon is that was actually not part of the script and Sweetums simply refused to fight his friends. While I can certainly understand the hesitance behind placing any classic Muppet Show characters in an antagonistic role, I do find it a missed opportunity for the film to not include characters like Uncle Deadly, since it would have been a great way to reintroduce him to the franchise after an over 15-year absence. Outside of that, the most interesting thing I can say about the other pirates is how they do reference one more character from the book. In the novel, there is a guy called Tom Morgan, who is described as being a bit dim, and later on, he is the first man we witness Silver kill shortly after arriving on the island. And he got split into the Muppet characters of Dead Tom and Clueless Morgan. The Treasure Island book is a lot like Star Trek, in a sense that nothing too misfortunate befalls the main characters, Jim, Livesley, Trelawney, Smollett, Ben, and Silver. Well, Smollett does get shot and Jim gets lightly stabbed in the shoulder, but they are played as minor inconveniences. Anyone else is essentially a red shirt who only exists to die as a way of reminding us of how dire the stakes are, often perishing mere sentences after we first learn their name. The point of this is that the pirates start out significantly outnumbering the heroes, but their numbers are slowly whittled down. However, since this movie isn't going to kill anyone, or at least anyone who isn't already dead, that final fight ends up being 9 against 20. Granted, one side does have Miss Piggy, which is never a fair fight. And now's the fun part of the discussion, where I get into aspects of this 30-year-old movie that make it a lot more difficult to wholeheartedly love.
Big fat ugly bug-faced baby-eating O'Brien?
Aye.
When the characters reach the island, they encounter and are captured by a tribe of pigs, who seem to have made Benjamina their leader. These characters exist to perpetuate gross stereotypes about natives that you often find in media like this. Violent cannibals who only speak in broken English. But you expect the Muppets to be smarter than that, and that it's leading to some kind of subversion, but that twist doesn't happen, as they play this completely straight without any sense of irony. And I have to say it, none of this was in the book. A choice was made to add them to the story. The book certainly has racist undertones, especially once we get to the titular island, where suddenly characters are incapable of walking 5 steps without bringing up how pure Christianity is, and Jim being relieved when he sees that Ben Gunn is specifically a white man. But besides a quick mention of Jim fearing the idea of cannibals, at no point do we ever learn if the island is inhabited, and frankly, it should have stayed that way. You do have to wonder if they regretted this choice at all when it landed them in a bit of legal trouble. With one of the pig characters being named Spa-Am, the Henson Company received a lawsuit from the Hormel Foods Corporation, who attempted to sue them for copyright infringement and insisted this caused them financial damages. Though this was dismissed by a judge for the company failing to provide any legitimate evidence of this, saying one might think Hormel would welcome the association with a genuine source of pork. While they won the case, the company later renamed the character when he appeared as a boss in the game Muppets Race Mania, now simply being referred to as Pig Chief. With the entire mission statement behind this film being to go as big as possible and push the limits of what a Muppet movie could be, they needed a score that would match those ambitions and elevate the already larger-than-life feel. So of course they got Hans Zimmer, who at the time was fresh off composing The Lion King, to work some of his magic. And here's yet another case of a creative working on this film who fully understood the appeal of the Muppets.
To make the Muppet thing work, you have to surround it with reality. You know, for those characters to really come across as crazy, the more real and traditional I am in my scoring.
His score gives every scene in this movie a grand sense of importance, using a lot of percussion and triumphant bass for the film's main theme, which is referenced during key moments. But it still is not lacking hints of that recognisable Muppet charm, mixing in the chaotic fun with the intensity of the action when Jim, Gonzo and Rizzo have to escape the Benbow Inn. It's these two completely different tones that shouldn't fit together, but Zimmer finds this beautiful marriage between them. The music of the movie is almost like a conversation between the different sections of the orchestra, where all the instruments are fighting for dominance, much like the crew of the Hispaniola and the Pirates, with pieces like Land Ho really highlighting that conflict. And yes, you can see how his work on this movie would go on to influence a certain other seafaring motion picture Zimmer would compose for a few years later. Then we have the other side of the soundtrack, the original songs, which are a good thing to have in a musical. They were all written by husband and wife songwriting duo Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil, who had hugely successful careers writing for pop stars, though my audience are far more likely to be interested in the fact that the pair worked on the music for An American Tail and Oliver and Company. So that explains why quite a few of these are in my all-time favourite Muppet songs.
The humor of the Muppets is that it's a perfectly normal world. It's just completely insane, but to them it's normal. You can't look at it as something funny. You have to do it completely seriously. So that held over, I think, with the songs too. You have to kind of write them as if you're just writing for a character. A serious character, and the fact that it's a Muppet makes it funny.
The film opens with Shiver My Timbers, an almost marching song depicting Flint and his crew dragging the treasure across the island while the various animals and animate objects tell their story. It's such a great tone setter that certainly alludes to what viewers expect from the Muppets, while also communicating that this is not going to be the standard fare. With such colourful lines like, the devil himself would have to call them scum, or when there's money in the ground, there's murder in the air. A brilliant and, dare I say, explosive way to start the film.
Shiver my timbers, shiver my sails, dead men tell no tales.
The next number is Jim's I Want song titled Something Better. It's a pleasant piece and one I relate to more and more the longer I work in retail, but I don't know whether it's supposed to be so utterly generic on purpose, a joke about how similar these types of songs often are. But the energy does really pick up once Gonzo and Rizzo join in, creating a nice build up to the song's climax. Sailing for Adventure is the first of 3 huge ensemble group numbers, which is where the soundtrack really goes for those classic Muppet vibes, with clever lyrics and plenty of quick jokes thrown in.
Every storm we ride is its own reward.
And people die by falling overboard.
People die by falling overboard.
This is when the soundtrack really locks in, as it is nothing but hits from this point on. This is also where the aforementioned stellar choreography by Pat Garrett makes itself known, and cinematographer John Fenner is able to really start flexing his skills, creating these beautiful sequences packed to the brim with kinetic energy. And the following number, Cabin Fever, is no different. A song that somehow manages to be of an even higher octane than Sailing for Adventure, because its only purpose is to liven up the second act of the film, containing a veritable buffet of visual gags.
In the middle of the movie, there's something as a writer for films, so the second act. The middle of the second act, your movie becomes deadly dull. I mean, you could just, because you set up the story and now you're playing it out. And so in the middle of this movie, they're on this ocean voyage and they can't get to the island immediately. There's got to be some tension getting there. So we're like, what do we do? I mean, these guys, we're on a boat. I mean, it's going to go crazy. And it's sort of like, hey, wait a minute. What if they go crazy? Because there's a thing called cabin fever from being stuck in a cabin. I'm saying, well, if you're on a boat for however many months you are to do these kind of voyages, you're going to go a bit stir crazy. So this whole brainstorm of this completely ridiculous musical number in the middle of the movie, simply to do a completely ridiculous musical number in the middle of the movie, came about.
It's pure, unashamed classic Muppet mayhem as it cycles through multiple music styles and genres without ever losing engagement as you watch the characters completely lose what little marbles they had to begin with.
Cabin fever!
Oh, the wind is back!
What are we doing? What's going on? What was that? I feel like such a fool.
And the unconventionality continues into our big villain number, Professional Pirate. A rambunctious sea shanty as Silver and the other mutineers attempt to convince Jim to join them by explaining how piracy gives them a sense of brotherhood and belonging. And I mean, it's Tim Curry.
Upstage, lads! This is my only number!
Despite being no stranger to musical movies, Curry often didn't enjoy singing on set. But because of the overwhelmingly supportive environment the crew and the Muppet performers cultivated, he found the confidence to sing all his parts live, which gave the song that extra oomph. And yes, that is a technical music term. Jim Hawkins is a better man than I, for if it was me in that position, I would have been won over instantly. Because of the treasure. Definitely no other reason.
We're a festival of conviviality!
Now, there are a few things I've said throughout the course of this video that I expect to get some pushback on, And this next statement is no exception, because the final song of the movie, Love Led Us Here, is the best of the whole bunch. What can I say, I'm a sucker for a Kermit Piggy duet, and this remains at the top of that heap. Shout out to those of you who've been around long enough to remember when I made an AMV to this song. But while I love the piece itself and how wonderfully sincere it is, what puts it over the top is the sequence that accompanies it. The juxtaposition of Smollett and Benjamina dangling over the cliff while the pirates are losing their mind over the gold. But it still doesn't detract from the genuine emotion of the song. And while I greatly respect Kurt Thatcher's talents as a writer, this is where I have to disagree.
Especially with Muppets, I'm like, come on, they're funny, they're wacky, it's a pig and a frog. If you try and take this seriously, we're doomed.
That is simply him straight up missing the point of why these characters work. Thankfully, he didn't get his way, and we got the best song from the soundtrack.
Oh, Smalley, you saved me.
With the captain rescued and the pirates defeated, the film ends with Silver returning Jim's compass and rowing off into the night, before promptly sinking due to a defective lifeboat, which means he has now been marooned on the island. A fun twist of irony, as faking concerns over that issue, is how he tricked Mr. Arrow before casting him adrift. The heroes celebrate on the deck of the Hispaniola while deciding what their next adventure will be, with Jim now placed in the position of captain. I don't really know why he gets that promotion, but good for him, I guess. It goes without saying, the ending of the novel is not quite as optimistic, containing something of an epilogue explaining what all the various characters do with their share of the treasure, while Jim has been left shaken and thoroughly traumatized by the whole experience. Not exactly the open happy ending the film gives us.
Brother, here they go again.
Upon its release, Muppet Treasure Island opened third in the box office, grossing nearly $8 million in its opening weekend. By the end of its run, it had made $47 million globally, making it the second highest grossing movie in the franchise at the time, and a decent improvement over Christmas Carol, though you wouldn't know that looking at how much cultural impact each of them ended up having. If I had to sum up the major difference between the two, it would be that Muppet Christmas Carol dragged the Muppets kicking and screaming into the world of Christmas Carol. This film drags Treasure Island kicking and screaming into the world of the Muppets. And it's not as if they were coy about that fact. Even during the announcement, Brian Henson was very open about how many liberties they were going to take compared to their previous literary adaptation. And going by that metric, it is very successful. Definitely the closest they ever came to truly recapturing the magic of the original trilogy. It was one final attempt to show these characters still had what made them so special before they'd move on to trying something entirely new with them. This was not an easy production by any means, but everyone was here for it and gave it their all. Even if I found some of those choices misguided, I can't help but respect the talent and passion on display throughout, which allows me to continue enjoying the film from beginning to end after all these years. And if nothing else, I will always be grateful to it for introducing me to this world of singing frogs, dancing bears, martial art pigs, and
whatever.
Yeah. In terms of work, probably what I learned from my father was to trust people around me. And I think that's because I think that he used to get so much excitement out of having an idea that was very clear. I mean, he knew exactly what he was planning on doing. And then what he loved to do was hire people around him who were very creative and then get them involved and then see how it changed, not protect it. He never protected his vision. He always let it move and shift with the creative people that he put around him, and then seeing what the result was, and the result would never be quite what you expected, and hopefully it would be a lot better than what you expected. So I learned from him to trust the production designers and lighting directors and camera operators and writers and all that, and performers that I had around me, to trust them and take their input and integrate it. And as a director, almost most importantly was to figure out a way to integrate everybody's idea into a cohesive whole without it falling apart.
If you enjoyed listening to me talk about the Muppets and want to hear more, I have an entire playlist containing all the celebrational and inspirational videos I've made over the years. I would be especially grateful if you checked out my review of Muppets Mayhem or my extensive breakdown of the Muppets at Walt Disney World. Be sure to tell me your thoughts and feelings on Muppet Treasure Island down below. Do you agree or disagree with any of my points, or is there something you think I missed entirely? Also, let me know if you read the original Treasure Island novel, because that was an interesting experience. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the fun stuff I'm currently working on, and if you're feeling generous, become a member of my Patreon, so that I can continue putting more resources into these videos. Until we meet again, I'm Jake, and thank you so much for visiting my Mind Palace. Now, if you'll excuse me, there's something I forgot to do earlier.
Set the sails!